exists. There's been a lot of... I'm getting some feedback. Modern science has discovered a lot of things very, very recently. The best way I can describe it, as I have studied this, it looks like I picture a mountain, and the scientists are kind of going around in circles on the mountain until they get up to the very top, and when they get up to the top, they realize that the biblical history is already up there. They finally arrived at the same place once they finally arrived at the truth. And with the marvels of modern science, they've discovered a lot of things. And in just the first 14 verses of the Bible, I'm going to show 8 or 9 examples where even 15 years ago, up to in the last year, they've discovered that things that they believed were inconsistent in the beginning of the Bible all along, they've now discovered the Bible was right about in creation. And for me, I think it's extremely important because like a lot of times we engage people about, well, the truths of the Bible or a specific detail about Christ's ministry. But the foundation, the beginning, starts with a belief in God. And when Jesus was preaching, he was preaching to people who believed in God for the most part. A lot of people that we try to evangelize to might not. Sometimes people will waver or kind of believe in something, but they're really not too certain about it. And that's really foundation. To have that belief in God, a supreme being, a creator, comes, in my opinion, first, and then, of course, the faithfulness that goes along with that, the seeking of the truth that comes after that, then you arrive at Jesus, and then some of the details of the sleep of the dead and the baptism and all those things, but first comes a belief in God. So, in my opinion, this is a really important one to look at what's happened recently scientifically that, in my opinion, and what I'm going to try to show you all this morning in the next few minutes, proves that God exists. Because my theory is, if these many details were right, how in the world could that happen without God's existence and giving that message to the writers of Genesis, to the writer of Genesis? At the end, I'll show these many details being correct. The odds of someone with no modern technology, even all the scientists who have studied these things over the last 100 years, arrived at a different conclusion. I mean, and yet with no modern technology, they knew the creation of Earth, the creation of the universe, a lot of the foundations of the Earth. And that would be impossible. That would be impossible. A couple of scientists, I'll start right here, just to kind of set us up and get us ready here. Werner Heisenberg, he was awarded the 1932 Nobel Prize for Physics and for the creation of quantum mechanics. And he says, the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. And that's what I see as been kind of, there's a very specific example, but that's a metaphor for what I think science has gone through. And if you look at a lot of the studies out there of astrophysicists and cosmologists, they're all arriving at there had to be a creator for this universe. It's the fine-tuning that is involved is a trillion to the trillion to the trillionth times more detailed than the most detailed things we've ever created. And that, the slightest little fractions that they can't even imagine of any one little thing, of anything, life would not be possible. The entire universe would not be possible. And the second one is from Isaac Newton, which we've talked about before, but some brief information about him. Isaac Newton is the father of chemistry, the most powerful in modern telescopes, discovered gravity, I believe special relativity, had the discovery that space and time could be bent in a lot of circles, and if you read a lot of things about him, people will agree, probably the greatest scientist ever. He was also a monotheist, believed in sleep of the dead, and preached or wrote against a personal devil. He could read Greek and Hebrew and was a professor at Cambridge with access to the original Vatican manuscripts. Just anytime I come across something from Isaac Newton and I arrive at the same place where he arrived, it makes me feel very comforted. So we won't have to flip a lot in our Bibles today. It'll be Genesis 1, verses 1 through 14, and we'll just go one at a time here. I don't have my clicker. I'll come grab it. Thank you. Just a couple of recent headlines. These are just last couple of years. These are not in biblical publications. Wall Street Journal: science increasingly makes the case for God. Another one real quick here. You gotta hold it up maybe. Computer scientists prove God exists. Let's read Genesis 1:1 real quick. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, up until the last maybe 50 years or so, I believe that, everyone's heard of the Big Bang. Well, we're going to hear an MIT scientist here talk about the interaction between the Big Bang and God's creation. And going back to verse 1, in the beginning God created heavens and the earth. I remember Ben speaking about the heavens and the earth, and that there's 3 heavens. And this one in particular, there's about 8 or 9 times that the phrase heavens and earth is used. And anytime that that's used, it's always used to describe the entirety of creation. Space, time, everything. There's no word for universe. Universe doesn't appear. Galaxy, those kind of things don't appear. They didn't have that in their language. They used the phrase heavens and earth to describe everything, the entire expanse of everything, the universe. They didn't have that word, so they used this phrase instead, heavens and earth. And let's see. And it was in the last 40 years that it was discovered that the universe actually had a creation. Prior to that, the understanding was that it's just something that just went on forever. It had no beginning, no end. And if the universe was created, and in all these laws, and all these, the laws of the universe, all the matter, all the energy, every little detail. I remember a sermon Don had about the mustard seed, how small it was, and yet, or on seeds, how they're so small, and yet in that one seed, every detail about that entire tree, everything about it is contained in that one small seed. And in this creation, it can't even hardly consider it, but in this creation, all the details of the universe, down to the tiny little atoms, down to everything in people, was contained in that instant when the universe was created. And that has to be creation. And there's an MIT scientist who talks about that here. 30 years of experience, research and teaching. His bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees were all from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology for astrophysics. Maybe like a little 5-minute video we'll watch.
My name is Gerald Schroeder. I have a, thank God, a strong science background from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, bachelor's, master's, PhD, 7 years in the physics staff, seen a whole range of atomic bombs detonated, moved to Israel, met my wife, Barbara Sofer, a great writer, and then teach Torah and science. So luckily, I'm lucky that I have the two that come together. And one of the questions that I'm asked as a scientist is, how can a scientist really believe that there's something what we refer to usually as God? You know, is this metaphysical whatever acting in the world or producing the world? And the irony is, the question's really a non-starter. Science has in fact discovered God. And you can talk to the hardline atheists and they will say, it looks like science has indeed discovered God. And how would that be? Well, if you take the trouble of going to the web and they're typing WMAP, the initials for a satellite, it's a diagram that shows the development of the universe from the creation over time. It's a timeline. Every word on that diagram comes from the NASA site. It is the condensed knowledge of the scientific community of how the universe created and how it got to where we are today. Each of the lines, the vertical lines, is another billion years. Okay, you start from a burst of energy at the extreme left side of the diagram, and you end up at the far end with the oval. The oval is to indicate expansion in all directions. Of course, because it's a timeline, we can't show that on a single piece of paper.
Remember that phrase, expansion in all directions?
We see here, most amazingly, that on the extreme left edge, it shows a beginning to the universe. Now go back less than 50 years. If I were teaching that at Tech, a person could lose tenure saying that there was a creation of the universe. It sounds like it's Bible. Because less than 50 years ago, the overwhelming scientific opinion was the universe is eternal. There was never a beginning. The Bible is wrong from the very first sentence. And then we discovered, suddenly, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, the Bell Labs in New Jersey, the northeast of the US, discovered the echo of the Big Bang, the energy left over, which George Gamow, 60 years ago, predicted that if there had been a universe created hot and small, it would have exploded, and the energy would get more and more dilute. And Penzias and Wilson, these Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, discover this energy that had been predicted overnight. The Bible got it right. There was a beginning to the universe. Now, the black in the diagram is nothing. It's not a vacuum. Vacuums are within that diagram, within that cone of expansion. Vacuums are empty space, and space is something. The black of the paper around the diagram is nothing. It doesn't fit in our human brain, because humans think in a box made of time, space, and matter/energy. No human, as clever as they might be, as expansive as they might be, thinks out of that box. So when we say outside that diagram is nothing, we can use the words, but we can't conceive of nothing. It doesn't fit in the human brain. How are we going to have this idea, is there a God or not? Notice that the creation force isn't a three-letter word, G-O-D. If you look at the words carefully, it's a quantum fluctuations. That understanding was first brought down by Ed Tryon, brilliant human being, in the journal Nature, almost 40 years ago. The universe allows creation of something from nothing, provided you have the laws of nature, the quantum fluctuation. Tryon realized, and he published in the journal Nature, one of the two leading peer-reviewed journals in the world, that you can create something from absolute nothing, provided you've got the laws of nature, quantum physics and the laws of relativity. In other words, the laws of nature. So look what science has discovered. We can create the universe from absolute nothing, provided we have the forces of nature. Now, the laws of nature, the forces of nature aren't physical, they act on the physical. So if they create the universe, that means they predate the universe. So now we have a set of forces, we call them the laws of nature, that are not physical, that are able to act on the physical. They create the physical from absolute nothing. And they predate the universe, which means they predate our understanding of time. Put that together, it sounds very familiar. If you haven't noticed it, that's the biblical definition of God. There's only one nuance that's left hanging. We can talk about it another time, perhaps. Is that which created the universe, those forces active in the universe. But up to that point, science says, you are correct. The definition of the biblical God is predates time, outside of time. God is not a physical being, is a force, and it creates the universe. You'll notice that the opening chapter of Genesis, the only name for God is Elohim, God as manifest in the universe. Science has indeed discovered the biblical God. Well, we just need one part left, crucial. That which created the universe is also active in the universe itself. The very fact that you're watching this now pretty much establishes that point.
Next verse is, the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. I'm going to jump to a couple of other scriptures here real quick. One is, actually let me go back to verse 1. So one is the expansion of the universe. That wasn't understood until in the last 50 years, they discovered the Big Bang and the creation. And they discovered that the earth is in fact expanding. There is 11 instances in the Bible, actually in the Old Testament specifically, where Job 9:8, he alone stretches out the heavens. Psalms 104:2, he stretches out the heavens like a tent. Isaiah 40, he stretches out the heavens like a canopy. There's 11 instances, the creator of the heavens who stretches them out. That, and up until the last 50 years, they thought that wasn't correct, that the heavens were not stretching like that. And yet the Bible got it right. So we have a creation from nothing that up until the last 50 years, all of science had understood that it was incorrect. We have the understanding of that the universe is expanding that was described in the Bible over and over and over again in God's creation. So that's the first verse. Now let's go to verse 2. So the earth was formless and void, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. So that second part, darkness was over the surface of the deep. I'm going to stay in Job there. I think I have it right there. In Job 38:9. So there's a few places that describes creation. Job is another one of them. I think it's 37 through 39 describes creation in Job. And here's one part. When I made the clouds its garment, this is talking about the sea of creation. Sorry, I should have gone back one before. It's describing the sea in creation. When I made the clouds its garment, the clouds were garmenting the sea in creation, and I wrapped it in thick darkness. So now we have the earth has no land on it, and it's dark. Basically, there's only two things we know about it. There's some wind, or God moving over it like a wind. It says like a spirit, which just means like a wind. We have basically wind, darkness, and water. That's all there is on the earth at creation. So at first, this contradicts all of science up until really the last 5 years or so. Here's a National Geographic article from October 2014. So this is how recent these discoveries are. Mystery of the Earth's water origin solved. And here's the quotes from it. Actually, this is more of the heading. Instead of arriving later by comet impact, Earth's waters have likely existed since our planet's birth. October 2014 in National Geographic. The water that makes Earth a majestic blue marble was here from the time of our planet's birth, according to a new study of ancient meteorites. Scientists reported Thursday. Where do the oceans come from? The study headed by Adam Schiffan of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution found that our seas arrived much earlier on our planet than previously thought. The study pushes back the clock to the origin of the Earth's water by hundreds of millions of years to around 4.6 billion years ago, when the worlds of the inner solar system were still forming, so when Earth was still forming. Scientists had suspected that our planets formed dry, with high energy impacts creating a molten surface on the infant Earth. Water came much later, went to thinking. Thanks to collisions with wet comets and asteroids, some people argued that any water molecules that were present at the planet's forming would have evaporated or been blown off into space. The study's co-author, Morst Marshall, a geologist, for that reason, he said, scientists thought that surface water as it exists on our planet must have come much, much later, hundreds of millions of years later. But the new study found that, beyond a doubt, the planet formed as a wet planet with water all over the surface. End quote. October 2014. So these are very new discoveries reinforcing the biblical creation. Verse 3, then God said, let there be light. Didn't say he created light right then. It said, let there be light, as if to allow light to be on the earth. And the rest of the creation describes he created it right then, or he made it right then. In this case, it's a different phrase used. It says, let there be light. Remember, the earth was dark and formless. It just had water all over it. And in Job, we read that at creation, water covered the sea, and it was dark because of clouds. It said it wrapped it in a garment of clouds and darkness. God says, let there be light. Here is, did I not reference this? This is from science.com. And I don't have the date on it. It's within the last 5 years. This is from the planetary science professor at Harvard University's, Sarah Stewart. She published a study in the peer-reviewed journal Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. If you can't read it, there's a description of it. They are not arguing about this detail. A planet called, where is it in here? It's named THEI. Anyone in the room smarter than me probably already knows about it. Our moon came into existence after several planet-sized space bodies smashed into Earth one after another, with the final one actually forming our satellite, the moon. While several impacts repeatedly blew off our planet's atmosphere, according to a new study. Until now, scientists thought it was unlikely that the Earth could lose its atmosphere because of a giant moon-forming impact, but the new research based on recent studies showing that at its infancy, our planet had magma oceans and was spinning so rapidly that a day was only 2 or 3 hours. I think I must have missed that part. Anyways, THEI, if you go look it up, they found it's about a Mars-sized planet that hit the Earth early in its creation, and they described that it blew off most of the atmosphere and about 90% of the water, and added a lot of mass to the Earth, causing everything to shrink to the core and help develop our continents. And that's actually the most plausible description for how the moon was formed. All the scientists will agree. They say they can't prove it for sure, but our moon's makeup is way different than the makeup of other moons, in that it has a lot of similarities to the actual properties of the Earth. But so therefore, there was one theory a long time ago that it just kind of spun off the Earth. And there really was no better theory than that. Now that they've discovered a Mars-sized planet had hit the Earth, and that there's remnants of it on the moon and on Earth. And there's, anyways, I won't try to go into all the study. I wish I had more for it here, but we probably wouldn't even have time to look at it. But they're pretty sure that this planet had hit, or this Mars-sized planet hit the Earth, blew off the atmosphere, and that leads to the next verse. So now we have sort of an opaque surface, some sort of a translucent surface. If you guys have ever been in like heavy clouds, you know what I'm talking about. There's not really you can't distinguish the sun, you can't see the stars, there is some light coming through. That would have been the Earth at this time. So verse 6, then God says, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. So we're all still just talking about water here. We're not talking about any earth. God called the expanse heaven. not the same heaven that was used at the beginning, like the universe, heaven that's used to describe the sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. I'm going to jump forward a couple here. So from the book Evolution of the Habitable World, chapter 17, chapter 17 is called The Oxygen Revolution. This is from 1999. So, it says, so, if we consider the roughly 1 billion year period before the emergence of plants, or photosynthesizing life forms, it becomes a sensible notion that oxygen must have been very scarce in the atmosphere in the presence of some other oxygen destroying, it's called rock weathering and volcanism. But anyways, there was no plants. So you had you still had a very thick atmosphere, but some light was coming through. But what came next, now that you have some light coming through, and you have some, I believe what it's talking about here, where the water begins to separate. You have the lower water and the upper water. I think you're talking about the water cycle. Now that you have some light coming through, you're talking about an evaporation and a falling. So now you have a water cycle, and now you have some light. So now all you need now is some land. So verse 9, God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and gathering all the waters he called the seas, and God saw that it was good. Going back one. The growth of continents from Henry Ross, planetary biologist. I had to take a screenshot of it. Shows the first 2 billion years of the Earth, very low or no continents on the Earth. And then right about the same time that Genesis is describing here, as you go back through it, the Earth jumps up to a little under 20% of the Earth covered in land. And this research was discovered in the last 5 years. So now you have a water cycle, now you have some land, and you have some sunlight coming through. That's perfect for God to create plants now. Then God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit after their kind with seed in them. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. God saw it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a third day. Now here we get into the world's leading atheist, Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins. This is from the article, The World's Most Influential Atheists. Number 1. Weighing in at the top spot is, of course, Richard Dawkins, using science and especially the evolutionary theory of Darwin to undercut the factual basis of religious beliefs. He is turned against religion as rationally and morally incoherent. Dawkins is the most conspicuous public voice and face of contemporary atheism. And here's his quote of the creation of plants. From his book, The Blind Watchmaker. I don't know if any of you have seen that, have heard of that one. Why the Evidence Reveals a Universe Without Design. And the quote is, for example, the Cambrian strata of rocks. So when you look at the eras of the Earth, and when they formed, the Cambrian period is the first period where there was life. After that came all the other periods. There was all that period of time with no life, as Genesis describes, just water, dark clouds, no light. Then a period where there was some light coming through, some land starting to form, and boom, as soon as we had those conditions, God created all the plants. And his study acknowledges that. For example, the Cambrian strata of rocks, vintage about 600 million years, are the oldest ones in which we find most of the major invertebrate groups. And we find many of them already in advanced state of evolution. This is the world's leading speaker on atheism and most influential atheist in the world. He said, "We find many of them already in an advanced state of evolution. The very first time they appear, it's as though they were just planted there without any evolutionary history." Here's another one. Kevin Peterson is the Associate Professor of Biology at Dartmouth, graduated from the University of California with a PhD in paleobiology. His research is focusing on attacking the problems surrounding early animal evolution using molecular paleobiology. His current work focuses on understanding the timing of the Cambrian explosion. That's when all the life showed up on Earth all of a sudden. And he says, and I had to look up that word, it means explaining. So his word for explaining needs explaining. That's a professor of paleobiology for you. The materialistic, and that just means the evolution basic. You have theistic and materialistic being the evolution theory. So explaining the evolution basis of the Cambrian explosion, that's where all life just all of a sudden appears on Earth 600 million years ago, has become more elusive, not less, the more we know about the event itself. This is from 2009. I'm going to run through the rest of it pretty quick here. God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens." Again, the same phrase. It's not a creation phrase, it's "let there be" phrase. And it makes perfect sense that now that you have some land, now that you have a little bit of light coming through, you have a water cycle, the plants show up. We have one about that right here. The plants show up, you naturally will get a thinning of the atmosphere. Here's that one. Is it not next? That one is missing. Okay. It's got to be here. Yeah, we're good. So the plants show up, photosynthesis starts to occur. Obviously, as you add more oxygen, which is what plants do, and a lot of them. In fact, they said in this, basically it's like what they found is the opposite of evolution. All of a sudden you have all these life forms just appear, and then they naturally start to dwindle down. But they all just sprang on the scene, covered in plants. The atmosphere starts to thin out. Then you get verse 14. God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night." Basically, atmosphere thins out so that now it's kind of the atmosphere we have today, a transparent atmosphere where we can see right through it. Because it's the same phrase that's used to describe the thinning of the clouds early on. He says, "Let there be light." Not that he created it right then at that moment. He just says, let it be on the earth. Same thing in 14. God says, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. Let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years." Now I'm going to jump completely forward because now we get into the biology and we're going, that's too much for one day. So I'm going to jump completely forward to one thing I noticed in studying this was at the end of each day, all the way through the 6 days, God created, and then he said, and that was the end of that time, and it was night, the 6th day, and he counts them out. The 7th day doesn't have an end. The 7th day just goes on. At the end of the 6th, closes out the 6th, goes into the 7th, but the 7th doesn't have a closing like the rest of them. It doesn't say, "and then there was night." This is from Hugh Ross in Why the Universe Is the Way It Is. God's secession from creating during the human era, so that he stopped creating during the human era, he rested, helps explain this perplexing enigma. Because the fossil record reveals a turnaround in new species, with the appearance of humans. So before humans, new species came at the rate of about one new species per year on average. After humans appeared, the rate dropped to none per year. In natural habitats undisturbed by human activity, biologists have yet to observe the production of even one distinctively new animal species. Meanwhile, extinctions continue, even apart from human environmental abuse. The Bible offers an explanation for this puzzling feature of the fossil record. For 6 days, God created. On the seventh day, the human era, he's been resting. It's not closed yet. We're still in the seventh day right now. Let's close in prayer.